The first thing that made me realize something was wrong was the silence. But not that good Saturday morning silence without the sound of lawnmowers. It was the other kind. That dense, muffled silence that seems to warn that a bomb is coming. And in this case, the bomb had expensive perfume, abnormally high heels for a residential neighborhood, and a makeshift badge hanging around its neck with the HOA crest printed on A4 paper. I was in the kitchen, doing the dishes, and I saw through the window the woman standing on the sidewalk in front of my yard. Arms crossed, she looked like a reality TV judge about to eliminate someone for breathing strangely. She was staring at my 9-year-old son, who was walking in circles near the jabuticaba tree with a leaf in his hand and a discreet smile on his face. That was a moment of peace. My boy had a ritual. After lunch, he always liked to go out into the yard, walk in circles, mutter a few words that only made sense to him, and sometimes count the stones on the sidewalk. It was his, a habit, a mental space where he felt safe. But for this woman, it was the trigger for an attack of hysteria, disguised as civility. At first, she just watched, but it wasn't long before she pulled her cell phone out of her purse as quickly as someone about to record a crime. She pointed the device. It recorded. Yes, she recorded my son, an autistic child, in the backyard of his own house, without authorization. Then he started pacing back and forth in front of the gate. He had an expression of disgust mixed with, "I'm doing the right thing." I already knew this type, people who think they're the champions of order just because they know how to use words like statute, regulation, and disturbance of order. Before long, she called. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could feel the tone. Wide movements, finger pointing at my yard, head nodding as if she were facing the biggest scandal in the neighborhood. The woman called 911, reporting what? A boy walking in circles. She didn't know. She had no idea that the house she was pointing her finger at was mine, and that I was the state prosecutor, not the kind of assistant district attorney, but the name that signs warrants, opens investigations, and closes deals that determine the future of people far more dangerous than a hysterical neighbor. But at that moment, it wasn't about authority. It was about my son. Seeing her treat my boy as a threat, as if he were a foreign being who needed to be removed, gave me a tightness in my stomach that I hadn't felt in years of criminal prosecution. It was different when the target was someone from my home. Someone who had never hurt anyone. A sweet boy who doesn't hurt ants and who struggles every day to communicate in a world that doesn't understand him. When the police arrived, she went to meet them like an actress running to center stage. She gesticulated, showed the video on her cell phone, and pointed to a tree as if she were hiding an international trafficking network. The two young officers were clearly uncomfortable, not because there was an emergency, but because they had fallen into the trap of public ridicule. They had been called to restrain a child because she was walking funny. I went out of the back door, round the garden, and went to where the police were. The woman saw me, but didn't recognize me. Not there, not wearing shorts and an old band t-shirt. I thought it was funny how her prejudice prevented her from noticing who was coming towards the group. I approached without haste. I greeted the policeman. She was already in the middle of her speech, saying that child's behavior was worrying, that he could have been under the influence of substances, and that people like that devalue the neighborhood. Substances. A 9-year-old child. Autistic. At that moment, I looked at the two policemen and took my wallet out of my pocket, the official one, with my full name, my state badge, and my position clearly visible. The silence that followed was magical. The two officers' countenances changed instantly. They knew who I was, and they knew that that woman had just dug herself into a hole where she could no longer get out with class. I still let her finish the sentence she was saying. She tried to explain that it wasn't prejudice, that she was just looking after the neighborhood. All I did was look at her with the calm of someone who knows exactly how heavy a blow she can deliver. You filmed a child without authorization. You accused him of drug use. You called the police to intervene in an absolutely harmless moment. This is called abuse of the public system and defamation. I can open an investigation today if you want to continue." She froze. Literally froze. The color drained from her face as if someone had pulled the plug on her courage. At that moment, I didn't have to shout. I didn't need to threaten. The job spoke for itself, and all that remained of the woman was the embarrassment of having thrown all her arrogance into a hole she had dug herself. My son, oblivious to the scene, was still walking around in circles, now smiling, with the leaf in his hand, and his head free of any judgment. She didn't apologize. Not a sorry, not an embarrassed stammer, not a sincere look from someone who realized they had crossed a line. Nothing. She just stood there, her chin slightly trembling, trying to hold the pose of someone who still thinks she's right, even when the whole world has realized she's not. And that was the most infuriating thing. Because for these types of people, apologizing would mean acknowledging that not everything revolves around their vanity. And that, for her, was unthinkable. The two policemen gave me that look that mixes "we didn't know" with "that's going to pay off." The truth is that they were as uncomfortable as I've been at dozens of poorly reported crime scenes, but there was no crime there. There was a child and a woman who had mistaken a moment of calm for an attack on the public peace. After she walked away, visibly shaken but still holding her nose, the police asked to be excused. We talked quickly, professionally, without a lecturing tone. They knew they had been used, and they said something that stuck in my mind for the rest of the day. We get this kind of call more than we should, always with the same formula. Someone is different. The other person doesn't understand, so it becomes a threat. They left with more shame for her than she herself felt. I doubt she had processed half of what was happening. What she was probably doing at that moment was trying to format the narrative in a way that made her seem like a hero, defender of the neighborhood, mother of public order, protector of white picket fences and well-cut lawns. I went into the house and closed the door more tightly than I wanted to. My son was still in the yard, now sitting under the shade of the jabuticaba tree, watching an ant carry a leaf 3 times its size. He was at peace, because his world, despite being cruel to those who don't fit in, still allowed some refuge. But my world, mine was boiling. I couldn't get it out of my head that a woman, supposedly responsible for representing the interests of the neighborhood, had used her own ignorance as a justification for putting a child at risk. And not just any child, my child. The person who made me rethink everything I thought I knew about justice, empathy, and unconditional love. It was no longer just personal. It had become institutional. Because if she did that with the prosecutor's son, what couldn't she do with the others? With the delivery man who stopped the van for 2 minutes outside the white line on the sidewalk? The lady in house 42 who talks loudly on the phone? The boy in the corner house who has a nervous tic and takes controlled medication? Little by little, the pieces began to fit together. And, as a prosecutor, this is almost an addiction for me. Sniffing out the pattern, understanding the mechanism, deciphering the root of the rot. She wasn't just a hysterical woman. She was the reflection of a rotten system of control disguised as order. The HOA in that condominium was just a cute cover for neighborhood authoritarianism, washed down with unsweetened coffee and garage gossip. I looked up her history. Easy. 2 previous calls to the police reporting strange movements by teenagers who were just playing basketball on the court. A report of suspicious noise coming from the home of a solo mom with a wheelchair-bound son. A petition trying to have the garbage cans removed from the street because they attracted misfits, all with her name on it, always her. And that's when I decided, if she wanted to deal with a prosecutor, then let it be for real. It wasn't about revenge, it was about responsibility. People like that only learn when they feel the weight of their own arrogance coming back in the form of letterhead and legal protocol. On Monday, I filed a formal complaint, not as a father, as a public servant, based on the article about the misuse of public security resources, defamation, and the exposure of minors. I included the videos from the security cameras that recorded everything. Her standing there, recording, calling, explaining to the police officer that the boy seems altered, perhaps under some kind of influence. The icing on the cake, the audio I recorded, with her suggesting that my son be assessed by a mental health professional as a matter of urgency because he didn't seem normal. I didn't need to comment on anything. The audio spoke for itself, pure cruelty, wrapped in a tone that only got worse with every syllable uttered. I sent everything to the city council, to the HOA's conduct department, to the public prosecutor's office. And when I'd finished, I took a deep breath. I knew the bomb was armed, but I didn't set the fuse. She lit it with her own hands. Did the woman want to play authority? So let her face the consequences of what it means to mess with those who understand how the law really works. Because what came next, she wouldn't be able to solve with a little condominium meeting or a flyer stuck on the corner post. News travels fast when someone's mask starts to melt, especially in places where people exchange secrets as often as they prune bushes. It wasn't long before the buzz started. First shy, like someone afraid to say out loud the name of a woman who for years had reigned over the neighborhood alleys with an iron fist and a sharp tongue. Then looser, more amused, as if the castle of power she had built with spreadsheets, notifications, and pointing fingers was finally starting to crumble. She still paraded through the neighborhood streets with the upright posture of someone who believes she is above reproach. But you could see it. Her step was more restrained, the shorter look, the haste disguised as routine. She felt it. She felt that something was different. And it was. The HOA board, which until then had treated her like some kind of garden goddess, began to drift away. One of the members sent me an anonymous email, which, frankly, was only anonymous because he didn't know how to unsubscribe from Gmail, saying that he didn't agree with her methods and that he was available to collaborate with any investigation. The world is collapsing, and the rats are already looking for lifeboats. Meanwhile, in the prosecutor's office, my complaint was generating more than murmurs. It took shape. It ended up in the hands of the Civic Conduct Department, which is responsible for assessing the misuse of public services and abusive behavior in regulated communities. And when they started to pull the thread, they found much more than they expected. The woman had set up a series of questionable practices within the association, things that seemed small in isolation, but together painted a clear picture of abuse of power, favoring friends in parking space disputes, manipulating meeting minutes, improperly collecting fines for aesthetic non-compliance, and, of course, a pile of complaints from the most vulnerable residents that were never heard. At some point, she must have realized that the ground was opening up under her heels, because she tried to approach me in the middle of the street as I was coming back from the market, with a bag of vegetables in one hand and my son holding the other. He was happy, carrying a potato as if it were a trophy. She came out of nowhere, with that plastered-on smile that never reached her eyes. I'd like to clarify about that day. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to negotiate, to save her own reputation before her roof collapsed for good. I looked at her and just said, "The misunderstanding is thinking that you can treat a child like a problem and get away with it." She stammered something that mixed intention with community concern, but it was too late. The boy took my hand, showing me the potato like someone presenting an archaeological discovery, and I left. I left her there, standing on the sidewalk, holding her own failure. Over the next few days, the neighborhood split into two groups, those who had never liked her and now felt free to say so out loud, and those who still tried to defend the indefensible, saying that she only wanted the best for everyone. The latter, usually the same ones who had backyards so perfect that they looked like catalog scenes, began to dwindle in number as the emails from the Internal Affairs Department arrived. Yes, Because the investigation wasn't just theoretical, it turned into a series of surprise visits, document collection, analysis of recorded meetings, and verification of old complaints. And her name was on everything. Always her. The signature, the voice, the hand pulling the strings. She tried to organize an emergency HOA meeting, that last desperate gambit of someone who believes they can reverse a hurricane with duct tape. She sent out invitations on thick paper, in gold letters. Nobody showed up, except for a newly moved 22-year-old who thought it was some kind of welcome party and brought apple pie. That was the end of the rain. In the midst of all this dismantled circus, my son went on living, in his own time, with his leaves, with his steps, and that was what mattered, because the woman had tried to turn what she didn't understand into a threat. But she ended up turning her own arrogance into a sentence, all because she couldn't tell the difference between difference and danger. She thought she ran the neighborhood, but she never learned that those who really command respect don't need to shout. They just need to exist, with dignity. Her silence was now the loudest of all. She still tried. She made the last-ditch effort of someone who sees a castle collapsing and tries to glue the bricks together with spit. He wrote a public letter, a pathetic attempt to rebuild his own image. The letter circulated in residence groups, as if it were a manifesto in the name of community balance and preventing atypical behavior in common spaces. It didn't mention my son, of course. She used generic, bureaucratic terms, devoid of empathy. But anyone with more than 2 neurons knew exactly who she was talking about. She also tried to claim that she was being persecuted for doing what no one else had the courage to do. She said she was protecting the neighborhood from possible future incidents, as if anticipating discrimination was a virtue, as if isolating, humiliating, and exposing a child was part of some kind of justified moral vigilance. The kind of reasoning that only sticks in the bubble of people who have never looked beyond their own white picket fence. The irony is that she, who talked so much about norms, good practices, and community decorum, was the one who ended up at a public hearing. That's right. The Internal Affairs Department saw fit to make an example of the case. The members of the association were summoned. The prosecutor's office attended. I didn't even need to be there, but I went. For him. The room was full of faces that avoided looking at each other. People who for years had followed her rules as if they were divine decrees, now pretended not to remember her surname properly. The atmosphere was dense, heavy. The hearing began, and the evidence was presented one by one. The video of her filming my son. The audio in which she suggested urgent medical assessment. The call history. The undue fines. The complaints from other residents who finally had the courage to speak out. Her defense was a spectacle in itself. She claimed lack of emotional preparation, social pressure, desire to protect order. She cried, she stuttered. She tried to show photos from her childhood as if that would erase the wrongdoing. It didn't work, because what was at stake here wasn't just her name. It was the right of a child to exist in her own backyard without being treated like a freak. The board's decision was clear. Immediate dismissal from her position at the HOA, a ban from any residential association for the next 5 years, an administrative fine, and the opening of a civil suit for defamation and abuse of public resources. She left the room smaller than she entered, not because of the penalties, but because, for the first time, she didn't manage to manipulate anyone, not with pretty words, nor with tears. After the hearing, some neighbors approached me. They came with that, "We never agreed with her, you know?" speech, or "I knew it wouldn't end well." They smiled, shook my hand, praised my son. They made a point of saying how special he was, how much they admired our patience, our strength, those things that only appear when the train has passed. But the truth is that my son didn't need to be admired. He just needed to be left alone, respected for the simplicity of what he is. A boy who likes leaves, walking in circles, talking to ants. He didn't want forced acceptance. He didn't seek performative inclusion. He just wanted to exist. And now he could. The house became lighter. Walks in the yard became just that again. Walks. No stairs, no judgments, no fine china patrol looking over the fence. The street became silent. Not the tense silence of the beginning, but the good kind. The kind that allows you to hear the sound of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the laughter of a free child. She still lives in the neighborhood, but she doesn't talk to anyone. She walks past in a hurry, eyes downcast, as if the world had shrunk to the size of her shame. And maybe it has, because there are no regulations that can save her from the simplest fact of all. She has lost. Not just her cause, her position, or her prestige. She's lost her mask. She's lost control. And perhaps, for the first time in her life, she had to face reality without the protection of letterhead. I don't know if he learned anything. Maybe he did, maybe not. People like that often think they've been the victim of a cosmic conspiracy, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that my son is still walking in circles after lunch, and now no one has the courage to stop him. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.